Hello, bringing you latest headlines and breaking stories from across the globe. Welcome to Global News in Zuma, Nigeria. The headline says Russia, Myanmar begin debut sea drills. US police probe Jewish man's death at rival rallies. US gains favor. China loses in polls view. Protesters hold US ship to Israel with weapons. And China, Australia seek mutual gain after animosity. Stay with me for this and more stories. Senior General Mi Liang, Myanmar coup leader, has met Russia's Navy chief as the two countries set to hold their first ever joint maritime exercises off Myanmar's Andaman coast. Min Liang was then taken on board the anti-submarine destroyer Admiral Driput, where Russian Navy Chief Admiral Nikolai Efnemov explained the ship's abilities and weapon systems. He was also briefed on anti-submarine helicopters, reports said. Since the February 2021 coup, Myanmar and Russia have drawn closer, which stoked a violent catastrophe that has killed closely 4,200 civilians and forced hundreds of thousands from their homes. Moscow itself, isolated on the global stage since it launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, has become a key supplier of weapons and equipment to the Myanmar military. The first Myanmar-Russia maritime security exercise, Muramex, involves ships and aircraft and is being held in seas 85 nautical miles, that's 157 kilometers west of Mekhe, from November 7th to 9th. According to reports, the exercises will emphasize on the prevention of air, water, surface and underwater dangers and maritime security measures. Reports said the ships taking part also included the Admiral Panteleyev, another anti-submarine ship. Mi Liang, who leads the Military State Administration Council, has traveled to Moscow and Vladivostok since the coup and held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in September 2022. Russian officials have also been honored guests at Myanmar's Armed Forces Day, which takes place in March each year. Now, the United Nations police have declared they are probing the death of an elderly Jewish man at competing pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian rallies as a homicide. On Monday, Paul Kessler, 69, died after falling and striking his head after a confrontation during dueling demonstrations in Thousand Oaks, northwest of Los Angeles, authorities said. Ventura County Sheriff's Department said authorities had not ruled out the possibility that a hate crime had taken place. Witness accounts indicated that Kessler was involved in a physical altercation with counter-protesters, the sheriff's office said. During the altercation, Kessler fell backwards and struck his head on the ground. The sheriff's office said that it had not taken any suspects into custody following the incident, which appeared to be isolated and not part of a large effort. In a statement, the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles said Kessler had been struck in the head by a megaphone wielded by a pro-Palestinian protesters, and it will not tolerate violence against our community. The group did not provide a source for its claim. Michael Barkley, a local rabbi, urged the public against jumping to conclusions about the incident. The incident comes a month after Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel that Israeli officials say killed over 1,400 people, majorly civilians. Israel's bombardment of Gaza in response has killed over 10,000 people, according to the Ministry of Health in the Hamas-governed enclave. A survey by the Pew Research Center shows that the United States is viewed for more positively than China across 24 countries, with the gap between the countries broadening abruptly since the election of U.S. President Joe Biden. A median of 59% of the public in 24 countries has a positive opinion of the U.S., equated with 28% who say the same of China, according to the survey released on Monday. Overall, the U.S. was viewed more positively than China in 22 out of the 24 countries, with only respondents in Kenya and Nigeria favoring the Asian giant, according to the poll carried out between February and May of this year. The biggest gaps in positive sentiment were found in Japan, South Korea and Poland, where respondents were split by a margin of more than 70 to 30 in favor of the United States. The survey found a similar divide in sentiment toward the U.S. and Chinese leaderships, with 54% expressing confidence in Biden to do the right thing in world affairs, compared with 19% for Chinese President Xi Jinping. Pew said that public opinion towards both countries deteriorated in 2020 following the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, but sentiment toward the U.S. improved significantly after Biden's inauguration the following year. The pollster said sentiment towards the U.S. and China has fluctuated over the years, with some countries favoring China when former U.S. President Donald Trump and George W. Bush were in office. These gaps in views of the American and Chinese leaders reflect both soaring attitudes towards Xi in high-income countries and greater confidence in Biden, particularly compared with his predecessor, Donald Trump. Indeed, for much of his presidency, Trump received lower marks than Xi in many places surveyed, Pew said in an analysis accompanying the poll. This also happened at the end of the Bush era in 2007, when limited confidence in then-President George W. Bush and relatively positive rating for China's then-President Hu Jintao led to more positive ratings for Hu than Bush in most places. To Israel-Palestine conflict, hundreds of pro-Palestinian demonstrators rallied at the port of Tacoma in Washington state to block a military supply vessel they believe will carry weapons from the United States to Israel under dark skies and steady rain. There, they fear any weaponry on board will be used in Israel's ongoing campaign against the Gaza Strip, where over 10,000 Palestinians have been killed already. We want a ceasefire now. We want people to stop getting murdered now. We want a real examination and action on U.S. foreign policy and U.S. funding to Israel, said Wassim Hage, one of the protesters at the Tacoma rally. Hage works as a case manager and community outreach coordinator with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, AROC, the advocacy group that organized the protest. He said a confidential source tipped AROC off that the vessel will be loaded with weapons and military equipment and sent to Israel as it continues its military offensive in Gaza. Jeff Jorgensen, the Pentagon spokesperson, said the ship was certainly used to support the movement of U.S. military cargo, but he declined to offer further information due to operational security. The U.S. Department of Defense does not provide further transportation, movement details, or information regarding the cargo embarked on these vessels, he wrote. Now, Xi Jinping, Chinese president, has told Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that their countries could become trusting partners as the two leaders move to recalibrate ties strained for years over issues from trade to human rights and the COVID-19 pandemic. On the first visit to Beijing by an Australian leader since 2016, on Monday, Albanese met Xi at the Great Hall of the People. The two talked for over an hour in their second face-to-face talks in a year. According to a report from the meeting, Xi Jinping said the two countries had no fundamental conflict of interest and could become mutually trusting and mutually successful partners. Areas for cooperation could include everything from the peace and stability of the Asia-Pacific region to climate change, the Chinese leader added. Albanese, who has sought to steady ties since taking office last May, said a sturdier relationship will be beneficial into the future and noted the positive progress made in recent months after Beijing lifted most of its curbs on Australian goods. China and Australia built a relationship on trade for decades, with Beijing becoming Canberra's major commercial partner. But ties soared after Australia, then under the Conservative government of Prime Minister Scott Morrison, accused China of interfering in its politics, a national security-related ban on tech giant Huawei, and Canberra's call for an international inquiry into the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic further undermined the relationship. Earlier on Monday, Albanese stopped by Beijing's iconic Temple of Heaven and posed for a photograph of the circular echo wall where Australia's then Prime Minister Gough Whitlam stood in 1973, a year after the two countries first established diplomatic relations. Albanese described Monday's meeting as very positive and said he had invited Xi to visit Australia. Both of us certainly agree that we shouldn't be defined by our differences, recognize that they are there, but also recognize the mutual benefit that we have, Albanese said. On more stories, now again to Israel-Palestine conflict, Netanyahu says Israel to indefinitely handle Gaza security. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, has suggested that his country will manage Gaza security long after the end of its war with Hamas. Netanyahu said on Monday that he believes Israel will take responsibility for security for an indefinite period. When we don't have that security responsible, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine, Netanyahu said, according to report. His comments came after United States President Joe Biden, his closest ally, last month warned Israel against a full-scale occupation of Gaza, saying that doing so would be a big mistake. While Biden has strongly backed Netanyahu's war against Hamas, the two leaders have differed on strategies, including attempts to stop civilian casualties and the need for halts in fighting to permit the delivery of humanitarian aid. On Monday, Netanyahu reiterated that will not accept a ceasefire until Hamas releases its captives in Gaza, but signaled his openness to tactical lethal forces to let the movement of people and aid. Israel is coming under mounting international pressure to stop its bombardment of Gaza, which was launched in response to Hamas' October 7th attack that Israeli officials say killed at least 1,405 people, mostly civilians. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Monday called for an urgent ceasefire, warning that the enclave had become a graveyard for children. Biden has pressed Netanyahu to agree to humanitarian pauses to permit aid into the enclave, but backed the Israeli leader's opposition to a full ceasefire. On Monday, Israel's military said it had coordinated with Jordan to airdrop crucial medical supplies and food to a Jordanian field hospital in the enclave. According to the health ministry in the Hamas-run enclave, at least 10,022 Palestinians, including over 4,100 children, have been killed in the Gaza war during the month-long war. Netanyahu said on Monday that the loss of any civilian life was a strategy, but disputed the reported death toll, saying it included several thousand Palestinian fighters. The Israeli leader also accused Hamas of causing or using Gaza's population as human shields. Still sticking to Gaza and Israel war, Israel strikes Gaza hospitals, 8 killed. On Sunday, Israeli warplanes have continued to attack hospitals in Gaza City after another communication and network blackouts of the Nasser medical complex, which has 4 hospitals, suffered indirect and direct hits from Israeli missiles. At least 8 Palestinians were killed in the attacks and dozens were wounded, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. The medical complex contained the Al Nasser Children's Hospital, the Ran TC Specialized Hospital, the Eye Hospital, and the Psychiatric Hospital. The Israeli army called some of our staff that night and said they will create a fire belt around the hospital. Suleiman Quaud, a doctor at the Ran TC Hospital, said. At about 6:30 p.m. local time, Israeli warplanes hit the area between the Psychiatric Hospital and the Ran TC Hospital, wounding 35 people, including some of the medical staff. 2 hours later, the Ran TC Hospital was hit as well as its southeast and northeast sides. A children's cancer ward is located on the northeast side of the hospital, Quaud said. More than 30 children were receiving chemotherapy treatment there, he added. The hospital was then attacked for a 3rd time with raids hitting the grounds where ambulances and other vehicles were parked and where displaced families had taken shelter. The attacks on the hospital forced Rabah Al-Radi to take her sick granddaughter Sidra for treatment elsewhere. Sidra has cancer and broke her leg in an accident while fleeing from Israeli bombing that hit the school where they were sheltering. At least 16 of the 35 hospitals in Gaza are out of service, and 51 of 72 primary healthcare clinics in the besieged enclave has shut down completely. The psychiatric hospital, the only one of its kind in the Gaza Strip, is also no longer able to treat its patients. Jamil Suleiman, the general director of the psychiatric hospital, said we will take in 50 to 70 patients a day, from those coming to get their medicine to those who came to be treated for psychological trauma due to the sound of constant bombing. He said body wounds can heal, but psychological wounds are much deeper and need psychiatric treatment. He added, if Gaza's hospitals continue to be attacked, there is no need for the United Nations Security Council or the World Health Organization, Suleiman said. Now to Africa, 22 United Nations peacekeepers injured in Mali-based pullout. Some 22 United Nations peacekeepers have been wounded in northern Mali after their convoy was hit by 2 upgraded explosive devices EIDs as they continue their extraction from the country amidst worsening security. United Nations spokesman Stefan Dujarric said on Monday there have now been 6 incidents since the peacekeepers left their base in northern Kidal on October 31st to make the projected 350 kilometers, 220-mile journey to Gao, injuring a total of at least 39 peacekeepers. On Saturday, the convoy encountered two other improvised explosive devices near the town of Anafis, Dujarric said in New York, adding that he did not know if the devices had been there for a long time or whether the peacekeepers were purposely aimed. The injured were evacuated by air for medical treatment in Gao, he added. On November 1st, peacekeepers were injured and evacuated, and a further 7 last Friday as a result of IEDs. Mali's military rulers in June ordered the closely 15,000-strong peacekeeping force known as MINUSMA, or the United Nations Multi-Dimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission, to leave. The withdrawal is anticipated to finish by December 31st, despite the growing conflict in the West African country. Kidal, which had about 850 peacekeepers and 150 other mission personnel, was the third and final MINUSMA camp to be evacuated in the Kidal region. A Tuareg-dominated alliance of armed groups that recently relaunched a rebellion against the state claimed to have taken over shortly after MINUSMA's departure. The peacekeeping force was established by the United Nations Security Council in 2013 and initially aided to restore some calm to the northern areas, but violence has continued and MINUSMA has been increasingly hobbled by tensions and government restrictions since Mali teamed up with Russia's Wagner mercenary group in 2021. The Security Council voted to end its mandate on June 30th. We'll be back after this short break with more updates. Stay with us. You're welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. From Nigeria, Supreme Court erodes Nigeria's trust, says Peter Obi. Peter Obi, the presidential candidate of the Labour Party, has described the Supreme Court judgment of 26 October 2023 as a breach of the confidence of Nigerians in the judiciary. Obi stated this in a statement titled "From Courtrooms to National Conscience, Our Democracy is the Victim," delivered at a press conference on the Supreme Court judgment of 26 October 2023 on the 2023 Nigeria presidential election in Abuja on Monday. He stated, and I quote, "Without equivocation, this judgment amounts to a total breach of the confidence the Nigerian people have in our judiciary. To that extent, it is a show of unreasonable force against the very Nigerian people from whom the power of the Constitution derives. This Supreme Court ruling may represent the state of the law in the 2023, but not the present demand for substantive justice. The judgment makes principles and precepts. Indeed, the rationale and premise of the Supreme Court judgment have become clearer in the light of the deep revealing and troubling valedictory remarks by Honorable Justice Musa Dattijo Mohammed, JSC, on Friday, 27th October 2023. As someone who has previously benefited from the rulings of the Supreme Court on electoral matters, I have, after a period of deep and sober reflection, decided to personally and formally react to the recent judgment as most Nigerians have. Because we are confronted with very weighty issues of national interest, I will speak forthrightly," he said. The Labour Party candidate further stated, "As students and young lads at CKC Onisha, we were taught values and admonished to always choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong." Certain legal issues aside, the Supreme Court exhibited a disturbing aversion to public opinion, just as it abandoned its responsibility as a court of law and policy. It is, therefore, with great dismay that I observe that the court's decision contradicts the overwhelming evidence of election rigging, a false claim of a technical glitch, substantial non-compliance with rules set by INEC itself, as well as matters of perjury, identity theft and forgery that have been brought to light in the course of this election matter. These were hefty allegations that should not be treated with levity. More appalling, the Supreme Court's judgment willfully condoned breaches of the Constitution relative to established qualifications and parameters for candidates in presidential elections. With this counterintuitive judgment, the Supreme Court has transferred a heavy moral burden from the courtrooms to our national conscience. Our young democracy is ultimately the main victim and casualty. casualty rather of the courtroom drama, in disagreeing very strongly with the ruling of both the Presidential Petitions Court (PEPC) and the Supreme Court on the outcome of the 25th February 2023 presidential election, as declared by the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC). As Democrats who believe in the rule of law, we recognize that the Supreme Court is the end stage of the quest for legal closure to the matter. As a party and as candidates, Dutty and I have now exhausted all legal and constitutional remedies available to us. However, this end is only another beginning in our quest for the vindication of the hope of the common man for the better country. After all, sovereignty belongs to the people, if only for historical purposes. It behooves us to place our disagreement with and deep reservations about this judgment on public record. And finally, on the news, federal government says unnecessary U.S. advisory deters investors. On Monday, the federal government expressed fears over the November 3rd security alert issued by the United States cautioning against travel to Nigeria, noting that it generated panic and undermined investment. Mohammed Idris, the Minister of Information and National Orientation, during an interaction with editors in Abuja, said the federal government had consistently prioritized the safety and well-being of all visitors to the country. The U.S. had issued a warning to its citizens in Nigeria to avoid key hotels in Nigeria, citing some security threat aimed at the hotels in the large cities. The U.S. admonished its citizens to exercise vigilance at major hotels, be alert of their surroundings, keep a low profile, and review the travel advisory for Nigeria before checking into any hotels. The information minister, while responding to the advisory, warned the U.S. authorities against generalizing isolated security incidents across the whole hospitality industry. The information minister, while responding, said to reel out the various security operations carried out by the security agencies in their pursuit to ensure public safety. The minister emphasized that the federal government was dedicated to ensuring the safety and well-being of all Nigerians. He highlighted the successes recorded by the security agencies recently across the various theaters of operation. According to him, 7 bandits were killed in various parts of Kaduna State between November 1st and 3rd, while a joint operation by troops of the Nigerian Army and the Department of State Services carried out a dawn raid operation on terrorist hideouts in Gezawa local government area, successfully averting an imminent attack on Kano by the incidents, according to him. The minister said the bandits, terrorists, kidnappers, pirates, and other hoodlums were waging not only a physical fight, but also a psychological one, trying to undermine our faith and confidence in our security agencies. He warned the media leaders to be careful not to play into their hands through reporting that might be misleading or sensational or that undermine the morale of the security personnel. Asked if the U.S. security advisory had political implications, he replied, "We don't think the security alert is helpful. If anything, it creates unnecessary panic and it has an impact on our economy because people will now begin to get afraid." A recap of major stories says Russia, Myanmar begin deputy sea drills. U.S. police probe Jewish man's death at rival rallies. U.S. gains favor, China loses in polls view. Protesters halt U.S. ship to Israel with weapons, and China, Australia seek mutual gain after animosity. That's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Goodbye and have a great day.